Welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this is another one of these Skype-recorded Biota Lives that we seem to be doing currently. It's being recorded on November 20th, 2010. Well, I have a few bits and pieces of news and notes, but I'd like to welcome on Gerald de Jong first and foremost. Hello, Gerald.
Hi there, Tom.
So the last time we chatted was in February, and quite timely. It was with regards to an artificial life community forum or portal, which I launched yesterday. The site is freshsim.org, and I'd like to thank in particular Miro Karpish and Tim Pickup and also Larry Yeager for their particular assistance. We did have a small additional team, but I think those three in particular have been very active in terms of forming the forum and also the initial direction that the forum has taken. But for folks who are interested, go to freshsim.org and check it out. Create a user account, start populating it with your own artificial life-related musing. If you have any questions, if you would like to recommend any projects, it's there for open discussion. Gerald, have you had a chance to look at FreshSim?
Oh, yes, I got signed up right away. It looks really good. I was impressed.
Terrific. Yeah, Tim Pickup's artwork in particular, I think, is very striking. He originally started with some pencil sketches, and I thought initially this is looking very abstract art-esque, and then he did full 3D renderings of the lizard creature with the single eye, and it really has captivated, I think, all of those that were working on the site initially. Very visually striking.
It's a perfect image for the purpose. I love the one-eyed lizard.
Yes, I actually said to him that if he was interested, I'm sure he could get various artificial life developers to create an artificial life simulation around the one-eyed lizard. And certainly for folks listening in, if you're interested in using that artwork for your own simulation, Tim is more than happy for anyone actually to pick up that artwork. I think he has a 3D version of it with a skeletal underlying form. But yeah, very, very visually striking, and hats off in particular to Tim for the visual imagery. The other bits of news that I wanted to put out there is following some discussion with a fellow called Kevin O'Connor, who has worked in the past with Bruce Damer, I decided to collate. Well, I originally was going to do the first 50 Biota Lives, and the project has kind of expanded since I started. So the most recent one that I've had passed through was Jeff Clune's discussion on Biota Live in June. I'm sad to say probably only 3 or 4 episodes prior to this one. But it looks like the Biota transcripts are going to be a multi-volume set. I'm going to cap each of the volumes at about 60,000 words. And for the discussion that Jeff and I had, that was 10,000 words in an hour, a relatively dense 10,000 words. But Gerald, you've given your thumbs up to participating in this project as well.
Yeah, well, if I guess the advantage of it is that it makes it searchable. As far as I'm concerned, I enjoy the podcasts. I just like to listen to it while I'm on my bike, so I don't necessarily expect to be reading it, but I guess it's a good way to find things from the outside.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a good portion of the academic community that hasn't yet really embraced the podcast phenomenon. I certainly found that getting CDs out to, I think, Artificial Life 11 or Artificial Life 12, there was initial uptake, but certainly not as large as I imagined, and I think still the academic community is very print-based. The thing that I found fascinating actually reading through it is obviously with slight tweaks, particularly for my own speech impediments, but once those are removed from the text, it actually reads quite well. So I know you had some initial concerns that the signal-to-noise ratio might be a little low, but I think currently there's just nothing really out there in written form that is like what we do in Biota Live, and really my hope is that this text will find the form that we've created through all these Biota Lives and pass it on to a new audience. The other thing that I want to do through this, and I've had kind of ongoing discussions, Liz Swan, for example, when we talked about Publish or Perish on the Biota Live feed, about the problems associated with just the immense cost associated with academic publishing currently. And I had considered going with academic publishers. I had actually had some discussion with an academic publisher about putting the transcripts out through them. But I think the cheaper option is just through ebook and self-publication. So they will be released probably under $10 per volume, probably closer to $7 with a bit of luck. and the ebooks will be certainly cheaper than that, with the view that this may appeal to a wide variety of the students that are looking to study artificial life or currently studying artificial life. And I think also what I'll do with the volumes is group them into sections. For example, folks who listen to this podcast frequently will be well aware of the Evo Grid-related discussion that's been ongoing since pretty well the first podcast. So I think there are probably at least 2 volumes worth of Evo Grid-related discussion. Similarly, there's a lot of philosophy of biology and a lot of just playing grassroots kind of hobbyist artificial life, how to develop an artificial life simulation, open source, these kind of things. So there is almost a natural grouping which I think will find its way through the volumes, with the view that folks who have particular interests, if they're particularly EvoGrid-centric, for example, could pick up the EvoGrid volumes. If you're interested in the philosophy of artificial life and the broader philosophy that artificial life touches on, there'll probably be a couple of volumes for you. And if you're a hobbyist looking to read about how, for example, artificial life in game development or setting up a project or the benefits of open source with artificial life development, all these things will probably be covered in another volume. But it's an interesting form. It's going to take a lot of time. Just going through the Jeff Clune text alone, it takes roughly probably 3 times the recorded audio link to go through and edit it, and then everyone, Gerald included, will be receiving their own transcripts to go through with a fine-tooth comb to try and make sense out of various paragraphs too. But it's going to be an interesting project, one that's going to be going into next year. And my hope is, depending on how long it will actually take to get the revisions back in this kind of time frame, that probably a March next year time frame will be when the first volume is released. But it could happen earlier. It just depends on how long people take to go through the transcripts. I have heard of a new Dick Gordon book project that's come out, and I did circulate an email associated with this with various folks in the artificial life community that already have interests. My recollection is it's The Origin of Mind, and this follows in the origin of I think we started with life, then we went to design, now we're going into mind. I'm not really sure what comes after mind, Gerald, in the general spectrum of these things. Do any of these books interest you?
Oh yeah, well, these sounds interesting. Are they also anthologies of many authors?
My understanding is that they are typically 30 to 50 authors. I'm not really sure. It's being published through Springer. I've not seen really, really thick Springer books previously. I mean, Springer has a very well-defined form, particularly with their artificial life and related publications. So I'm not sure whether they're going to be a new format for Springer, or whether the standard Dick Gordon book format, which is typically 1,000 pages plus, will be used in the Springer format here. But my recollection is that I've only seen The Origin of Design. They seem to be being done out of order. I mean, Dick is probably listening to this, and he's been of poor health, and he was hospitalised for a period of time, so shout-outs to Dick, and my hope is that he's recovering. But I think probably Dick's health has affected some of this. The anticipation is that there should be at least 7 of these Origin of books when it's all wrapped up. I'm actually quite impressed by the speed at which they're being turned over. I wrote 2 chapters. I wrote 3 chapters. I wrote an EvoGrid collaborative chapter with Bruce, a chapter for the origin of life, and a chapter for the origin of design. And my hope is to also write a chapter for the origin of mind, because it's something obviously that I have strong venning interests in, developing Noble Ape. So I don't really get a sense of what they'll actually look like when they come out, aside from the fact that there are at least 30 authors per volume.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put together a book, of course, because you get a bunch of different opinions together, and that's probably why it can come out so quickly, because you can just get these contributions. It takes some effort to coordinate them and, I guess, edit them and stuff, but still, you get 30 people writing in parallel, more or less, I suppose.
Certainly, and there is some dialogue. I'm currently dialoguing on the Origin of Design book. I'm not sure if the other books will have dialogue, but certainly through Liz Swan's involvement with the Origin of Design, she insisted that there would be dialogue, and I'm currently writing correspondence with Steve Grand and a couple of other fascinating non-artificial life authors, one associated with AIDS treatment in Africa, and another one associated with the kind of meta properties of design. But all very interesting stuff, and I think just the ability, I mean, obviously within the artificial life community we probably don't have enough authors to do all 30 contributions, and what tends to happen in these Dick Gordon book projects is there will be maybe 2, 3 or 4 of us that are writing in any given time. But my anticipation is probably that there will be at least another one or two coming out within the next couple of years. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be an origin of structure. There were some origin of the universe and various other topics that were floating around initially. Could you see yourself writing in one of these in the future?
Yeah, perhaps. It would have to be, things would have to slow down a little for me because I've been in a bit of a rapids the last while. But I would like to, the one you just mentioned, the origin of structure, sounds like an interesting one for me because I'm more interested in the three-dimensional, world. And yeah, that'd be an interesting project for sure.
Truth be told, I think I actually just made up the origin of structure thinking it was...
Oh, I know that. I know, but it sounds like a good idea.
It does. Well, maybe we'll put that out to Dick, that maybe design was a bit too much of a loaded word and the origin of structure would actually give a slightly more, slightly more anonymous, slightly more artificial life-centric discussion point. Although, truth be told, the origin of design, a lot of it is very clinical, and there's an emerging field of design science which is actually quite interesting, and I think artificial life could have quite a bit to contribute to that, if nothing more just as a means of, describing an abstract model of the biological sciences and really even elements of the non-biological sciences, which was some of my argument in the origin of design. But Gerald, as I noted, it's been many, many months since you were last on a Biota Live, February in fact. I wanted to get you on around the launch of Tetragotchi, but that project is just moving from strength to strength. Since it's been February, could you give a kind of month-by-month introduction to the development of Tetragotchi up to the launch date, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it after the launch?
Month by month is not all that interesting because there weren't that. I recorded some podcasts in that time, but I think I stopped around June as well. It's unfortunate, that you can't, that I'm not able to find the time to keep the flow going in the podcasts and things like that. I'd like to pick that up again. But my whole life sort of went into a rapids recently, literally in the summer, because I went on a nice trip with my son up in the north of Canada. And so we had a great trip very far away from civilization up there. And so that kept me away from all sorts of stuff too. And at the meantime, while I was on that trip and afterwards, we set up a new company, me with a couple of colleagues, and we're now working on that quite intensely. It's called Delving, and we're busy in we're serving organizations in the cultural heritage sector, which is a really interesting niche. And working towards, actually, at one point in the future, we've been talking about this quite a bit, towards a system that has some artificial life aspects to it, because one of the challenges that we have is the enrichment and the sort of alignment and connecting up of these cultural heritage objects. And we've got plans brewing to have a system of many agents that are doing these enrichments, and in order to manage them and to have them share the effort, I expect that we will have some sort of metaphor of artificial life in there. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. It's called Delving BV. It's just a company that we set up.
Can we explore that for a minute, Gerald? Because that's absolutely fascinating. We can return to the Tetragotchi stuff. But the notion of archiving or understanding archives of heritage objects and the artificial life principles associated with it seems almost akin to the stuff that Ed Salford talked about in terms of optimizing search, but with regards to very curious objects. Is that the way you're seeing a potential artificial life impact on the stuff that you're doing there as being, or do you see something else?
That's probably similar to what I'm talking about, because what it's all about, more or less, is managing resources, and artificial life is all about this metaphor that things are consuming and surviving and or perishing, depending on whether they're successful or not. And that kind of analogy makes a lot of sense when you're constructing a system of many, many little agents who are all chasing out their little destinies. And you want to have some way of deciding which ones, deserve time to do some more work and which ones don't and stuff. So we're going to have little sort of artificial life agents that sniff around the data associated with these cultural artifacts and try to make connections among them and stuff. And I imagine, for example, the scenario in which one of these agents is somewhat successful in making some connections, and as a result, it gets granted some more resources in the form of food. But the more you use the analogy, the more it becomes something that becomes easier to talk about, because if you've got, you're just saying here, I created a whole bunch, or I spawned a whole bunch of these creatures, and they're hunting around, and this group of them, or these bunch of individuals were more successful. So as a result of their successes, they have more sustenance, and they start spawning new ones similar to themselves, and that sort of stuff. Just to have a kind of a bacterial, a petri dish analogy of little problem solvers that are busy, manipulating vast amounts of data, because we're talking about many millions of artifacts and much data around them, and a lot of potential for connecting things up. You might imagine that what we're dealing with actually right now is all of Europe. So that goes all the way to to Romania and Estonia, and Scandinavia is one of our main focuses at the moment. And there's a lot of cultural data stored in all these places, although a lot of it is done in a not so standardized way. So that's one of the efforts of our company, is to spread the open source goodness of some software that will help them do this in a much more consistent and efficient way. But at the same time, there are lots of connections among cultural artifacts. For example, something stored at one museum might be related to something in the museum of another country. And if we can find these connections by virtue of, for example, the artists having been at the same time in the same place for a couple of years or something, there's all sorts of bizarre little ways to make connections among cultural artifacts, even if sometimes these artificial life creatures refuse to make a decision and instead want to ask a question of a human. I can imagine them all sort of queuing up to ask some questions, and then people people who have a lot of domain knowledge in the cultural heritage area can, just answer questions, at which point these agents could just dive back in, or you could say delve back in, and start searching for more successes so that they can get some more food. I think it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, the idea that the artificial life agents would almost create web form questionnaires for selected experts that they would then fill out and then fit back. I mean, no, there are beautiful metaphors there, Gerald, and also the data set, the entirety of Europe in terms of these kind of artifacts. You're literally probably talking about, if not millions, hundreds of thousands of different items.
Oh no, we're talking definitely in the many millions, and we're focusing on Scandinavia right now. And for example, we went for a week to Norway to work with a cultural institution there. And they have quite detailed data on their cultural artifacts, even including geographical information. And so this, the more this data tells about these artifacts, the more you have some really interesting experiences available. Like imagine taking a trip to some neighborhood of Berlin or something like that. And on your mobile phone, accessing what happened there, 62 years ago.
Yes, I can imagine probably a lot happened that kind of
but there's all sorts of interesting cultural artifacts in the form of books and documents and archives and records and artworks and audio and whatever else. So you can actually really enrich a tourist experience. Make it really say something to people instead of just looking at the surface of the place as it is right now. Instead, you'd sort of have a time machine at your disposal. So there's a real value to gathering this sort of information. Part of the motivation around these parts is to get Europe working together. So any activities in the cultural heritage domain across borders is seen as a good thing, because if people are doing that sort of thing, they tend to start wars a bit less frequently.
Certainly. I mean, the history of Europe in recent years has been pretty good in that regard. But it's interesting that you mention the notion of wars, because there's almost a kind of cultural forensics aspect to what you're describing as well. I mean, obviously the Second World War was particularly, perturbacious, for want of a better term, in terms of moving cultural artifacts and these kind of things. But I'm sure, certainly through the Napoleonic period and going back even further in European history, there were times where a number of artifacts were moved in a variety of different directions. Do you anticipate that you will almost have this kind of cultural forensic aspect to what you're doing as well?
I'm not sure it's so much forensics. It's the way I see it actually eventually becoming a really rich resource is when, like I said, it gives you a sort of a time machine. So, imagine you're just traveling around, you look at a building. Well, if the metadata about these, cultural artifacts are accurate enough, you could more or less, based on your GPS position, discover that there's a story about this building, available, and it was recorded way back in another time period, and you can experience that on the spot. So it really it's potentially can really bring the world alive by, putting history right beside the current world. So that's I see that as a great potential. There's a whole bunch of other things that you could do with this stuff too. I mean, a lot of it is for research and things like that. And I see it also as a potentially a collection of millions of meeting points. Just imagine if you are a researcher in Finland or something, and you've found a certain series of artifacts, and what do you know? Somebody in somebody in Bulgaria has also been frequenting those same cultural artifacts in the on the search engine there, and you can find each other. There's a potential for collaboration and things like that. These objects could be a way to find other people interested in similar things.
Certainly. No, the possibilities are limitless, and what you seem to be describing is really your own kind of imaginative traversing through the data set as you currently see it. But this is a fascinating project. It's wonderful, actually, to be able to talk with you about it, as we were initially talking about the Tetragotchi project, but this seems to be a similarly exciting and very dynamic project for the future. So please, when you next appear on Biota Live, please do give us an update associated with this work.
Yes, I'd love to, because I'm really interested in, and my colleagues as well who formed the company together with me are interested in taking this approach and using some artificial life analogies, if only for the purpose of bringing it alive in a way that gives us a new language to use to talk about even something as basic as scheduling and resource management. You could put it that way, but you could also put it in terms of feeding the little critters. So I prefer to use an analogy that's a little more lively.
Very interesting. So before we moved on this wonderful tangent, we were talking about the Tetragotchi timeline. I guess we were in June, I think, when.
Yeah, well, I worked on it very very intensely for quite a few months and did a few podcasts, but not that many. There were a lot of really interesting things to wrestle with, and I eventually got it more or less working as I had hoped, and still with a lot of open ends, because in a way I really couldn't imagine enough about it to be able to picture the degree to which it was playable by a group of people, because that's the The whole idea, it's an online multiplayer game. Eventually I set up to give this talk in Budapest, which was for this conference of the European skeptics. And it was interesting. It was not exactly the best place for me to present this thing, but I got to tell you, it was very interesting as indeed to have all these skeptical people looking at what I'm doing. Because, they were all looking at me and saying, wait, is this real evolution or is this bullshit? It was so funny.
Yes, looking at the other speakers actually at the conference, you certainly do. You certainly did provide a very unique perspective, I think, on what the other folk were talking on.
Yeah. Now, it was funny because, in a way, my game and my efforts with Darwin at Home and with evolution, in a way, it plays into the skeptical movement in the sense that it gets people, primed for getting interested in understanding evolution. But on the other hand, the skeptical movement is more focused on, exposing charlatans, and these days they're very focused on making sure that homeopathic medicine doesn't get too legitimized because it's also a bit of a hoax. And there are a number of other issues as well that are more relevant to our time. But it all went back to the times some time ago. It's still happening, of course. But they're exposing people who are faking being clairvoyant and things like that. There's all sorts of people dowsing with little metal rods in their hands and presumably able to find water. Well, the whole idea of skepticism is to take a scientific approach to these things and do a double-blind test and then be serious about the results that come in. Because, for example, these dowsers, they absolutely did not score better than anyone who was guessing. So, there's a lot of illusions out there in the world, and the skeptical movement is sort of like a team of bullshit fighters.
Yes, I mean, the interesting thing with homeopathy in particular, when I worked in the Bay Area and LA most recently, don't even know what the term would be, but the woman who found me the jobs in the various locations I met when I was in LA, and she picked me up from the airport in a high-end BMW, and we went out to lunch, I guess. And she said, oh, yes, no, this is my husband's car. He's head of homeopathic cures in Southern California, and it's phenomenally lucrative. It is. Oh,
it's an absolutely fantastic racket, Tom. It's fantastic. You couldn't be better off because you basically guarantee to your clients that there's absolutely nothing in it. And then you sell it to them for a reasonable amount of money. It's the most brilliant racket. It's about 150 years old, and it just couldn't be better. But there's just one thing that people should be 100% secure with, and that is the idea that it is and is nothing more than placebo. So if you realize that, then that's fine. But if you try to deny that, then you're in some very interesting territory because there's nothing whatsoever to scientifically back you up. So it has to go on complete faith, that, in reality it works to some degree, but that's because it's placebo, and placebo works to some degree.
Yes, it's a very curious racket. I think it's something that we could probably spend a whole Biota Live talking about in particular, because I think there's a very curious element, and it's not just this country at all. I mean, Prince Charles et al.
Oh yeah, they really got on Prince Charles's case because he lent it some legitimacy that it should have never have gotten. Anyway, we're off topic again.
Completely off topic. I don't know if Prince Charles can lend any legitimacy to anything, but returning to Tetragotchi.
Yeah, so I had set up to give this talk at the Skeptics Conference in Budapest, and that really motivated me to get my ass in gear and see if I could get this Tetragotchi program out there. And so what I did was the timeline was I finally got it, to a state where it was not falling over very much, and it seemed reasonably playable. So what I then did is I got a group of about 8 people Friends of mine, actually, I announced it on the Grey Thumb NL, the Netherlands Grey Thumb, which seems to be the only one left, I
The
suppose.
last Grey Thumb standing.
Yeah. Anyway, we got a nice, enthusiastic group of people out, and we were all sitting around a table, and everybody was playing Tetragotchi. The server was running on my laptop on another table far away. And it was nice because it all worked. Because there were three different operating systems there. Somebody had a Linux laptop. There were a bunch of Macs, and there were a bunch of Windows machines. And it just worked in all these scenarios. Even in some machines that were not that modern. So that was good, and I got some really interesting feedback to start off with there, and then shortly after that I put it online, and shortly after that I went to Budapest to give this talk. And needless to say, after the talk, I got a bunch of Hungarians to sign up because as soon as people see it, they think, oh, might as well sign up to that. So I got a few people in the crowd who were interested. And then after that, I've given two more talks since then. One of them was for a group of Java enthusiasts in Holland. We formed this group for more than 10 years ago, and it's called the Java Nights. And I gave a presentation of the current state of affairs, gave a little demo. And then just a week ago or so, I gave a talk at this conference set up in Rotterdam called the Nationale Dag van de Zelforganisatie, which translated is the National Day of Self-Organization. Mm-hmm. So it's all about setting up, organizations of people that self-organize rather than requiring sort of hierarchical management. But there's also a search, of course, for the inspiration from where self-organization is mostly to be found and where it all comes from nature. So they invited me to give a talk about Tetragotchi because the evolution process that Tetragotchi sort of visualizes and brings home to the people who are playing is, in a sense, a formal self-organization because the muscle contractions, coordinate to achieve a purpose that they can't understand themselves, but they do coordinate with each other. So that was quite nice. That was a well placed, a venue for me to give a talk because I was my focus was why do things self organize, and of course why do they self organize? They do so to survive, and I talked about how evolution is kind of a collector of things that it stumbles across, and the things that you could point out would be elements of self-organization, like autocatalytic systems and things like that. Evolution finds them and doesn't let them go. So that was an interesting talk for sure. And about 55 people have signed up now for Tetragotchi. There's more or less a handful of people who are playing it quite regularly, and there are some who are really interested and they've got a lot to say about it as well. So I've been getting some really good feedback. It allowed me to make a few small changes, which didn't take a heck of a lot of work because I really only have weekends and evenings nowadays. But a few small changes which made it a lot more playable, and tried some experiments and backed off on them. And so I'm just playing around a bit more, getting feedback, getting some improvements in there. And I've got a bit of a scary list of to-dos, which I really should sort of knock off. And I'm a little bit hesitant to publish, get too many people interested in it at the moment because it's not quite refined enough, and I'd rather have it really nice before I get large numbers of people involved. And it also has to prove itself for scaling up, because it could catch on, and in which case there may be thousands of people expecting it to do something.
Yes. Well, this is probably the right point for folks who are listening in who've never heard of Tetragotchi before. What does it look like? What do people get when they log on to the site, and what's the environment in general?
Yeah, well, what they do when they get on the site is they sign up and they get their own personal launch file. It uses the Java WebStart launch system, and whenever you click on that, it automatically signs you in, and you visit the planet, which is something I always wanted to build, and I finally have built it and got it out there. And that is a spherical world for creatures to live in. I love the shape of the sphere, and this is finally a realization of it, because the Tetragotchis actually live on the surface of this planet. And the planet I'm calling slow-mo because everything happens there in very slow motion. So the physics sweeping, which makes all the different things move ever so slightly every tick of the clock, those sweeps, which would normally happen thousands of times a second to make a nice fast animation, are happening just once a second. So it's very slow. And so you've got this reality on this planet which lives on my server, and it's happening very slowly. But when you, as a player, log in, you get to experiment with multiple futures, and that's the whole trick of it here. You receive the world frozen in place as it is on the server, so you get a snapshot of how things are, and then from that point on, you can run the evolution process, which actually gives you several different futures in parallel to each other, and sort of pits them against each other. And the most successful future is the ones the more successful it is, the bigger chance of its survival. And it all is based on a genotype phenotype relationship, and the genes are mutating, and the genetic patterns that happen to be successful, in other words, they create successful behavior in the phenotype, they actually get replicated into the future. So there's this whole process behind it. And the evolution process is visualized, so people really get to see what's going on, and that's something I was really happy to be able to finally get out there, because I've had programs online before, but there was always just the evolution happened sort of invisibly, and you saw the results of it. But in Tetragotchi game, you actually see all the evolution happening on front of your nose, and so you've got this planet. When you visit it, you can experiment with multiple parallel futures and evolve sort of, so on the basis of demise of the weakest, which is my version of survival of the fittest. And you can see the improvements happen, and you can actually meet others and capture them and stuff like that. So there's different players interacting with each other in some ways, although it's quite limited. I'm going to be increasing that more. I'm going to make it possible for people to search for each other more easily, and also probably I'll integrate something like a kind of a chat system, so that when people are logged in, they can chat with each other, because I think there's there will be some interest in people sort of discussing what they're experiencing right there on the spot. And the nice thing about this whole process is I've finally got it out there. I've got a bunch of handfuls of people playing with it, and some of them are quite serious about it, and they've done a lot of stuff. So I'm getting all sorts of information back about how playable is this, and what could it be done. There's some people who are really good, offering some really good feedback, really good ideas, and really really thought out. They're playing it, and they're deciding what works and what doesn't, and they know as well as I do, or better probably, what does and what doesn't work. So I'm happy to receive the feedback and the discussion.
In terms of the Tetragotchi system, do you have a kind of master controller interface that you can actually see everything that's going on and navigate it aside from the game player interface?
And I haven't built anything separate, really. The reality of the game right now is that any player can travel anywhere on the planet and sort of select another player and, in a sense, become them. Although you can't evolve them or anything like that, or you can't control them, but you can go down and visit them exactly where they are, and you can look around and see what they're doing, and you can see them attacking each other and things like this. So you can actually zoom down to any place on the planet. And, as you can imagine, if I can make this, and I can make this quite easily searchable, you could probably search for a particular person and then zoom down and see their Tetragotchi in its current state and see what it's doing. So this kind of thing is going to be easier as time goes on. And so there's nothing I've got specially for me. The only thing that my player can do that other ones can't is I actually have a back door in there, which I'm not using for the online one, but I was using for the demonstration. I can speed up time.
So you have the time dial that you can twist if need be. So that's very interesting. So in terms of your own tracking, you're tracking it just as a regular player. No other means.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I'm a lurker on the Tetragotchi mailing list, and I see a lot of correspondence from a number of familiar folk to Biota Live, and also some new folks as well. In terms of your active users, do you think the contributors who are existing artificial life practitioners are giving you a different kind of contribution to regular users, or is it all basically part of the same feedback?
As far as I know, the people who are working or who are in Tetragotchi world now and giving feedback are not artificial life practitioners themselves. Although, Rudolf is probably one of the most active people, and he's been involved with Biota, but he couldn't really be called a practitioner.
I've seen posts by Eric Burton and Scott Schaefer in...
Yeah, they've been, there's been a bit of feedback from them as well, yeah. Not a lot, and it was a while ago, but it's there are a few.
So what kind of feedback are you getting, and what have been, maybe the top 3 or 4 learning experiences that you've had through putting this out live and having active user feedback?
Yeah, when I was going to give my talk just a couple of weeks ago at the Javanites gathering in Utrecht in Holland, which was just a group of 20 guys or so sitting around, and we give each other talks and demos. I really didn't have any kind of a presentation ready. But in the train on the way there, I got an email on the mailing list, which I thought was so special. I decided to read it as the start of my presentation, and it really gives a clue as to what's happening. So let me just give a little background for this. Prompted by Rudolf's comments, I speeded up time, so I made it 5 times as fast as it was. So he did he was playing with it in that way, and it was functioning reasonably well. But some other people were not all that pleased with the speed up, and I also thought it was not quite the way things should be. So I slowed it down again. And anyway, he was talking about this speed up and slowing down. And Rudolf said that if it slows back down to what it was, I think many would lose interest if they have to wait that long. Think of the MTV generation, he said. So my reply to that was, I know, I can't help but push the idea that this is a game that requires patience. Maybe the fast-paced generation will appreciate something that's a little more relaxed. And then came some really interesting feedback from a fellow who's got a Tetragotchi, which he's called Winona. And, people name their Tetragotchis. That's a good thing. So anyway, he says, I couldn't agree more. Evolution is not a fast-paced action activity. If you want fast-paced, there are plenty of games out there to choose from. I rather like dropping in every once a day or so to see what's happening on slow-mo and setting Winona's tasks for the day, and then getting on to something else. My 18-year-old son, who plays a lot of action games on the PS3, has shown a remarkable amount of interest in Winona's progress, and it has prompted him to ask me a lot of questions about selection for fitness and how that relates to life, how life is developed on the planet. And this has been a lot more stimulating than the discussions we've had after a game of Call of Duty. The notion that young people have a very short attention span and require instant gratification is largely a myth perpetuated by various media, and in my experience, most young people I know feel insulted and patronized by MTV and other sources of instant gratification media. My son also suggested that Tetragotchi would make a perfect iPhone or Android application, so he could check up whenever he had some free time on the train, and he could set himself an alarm for when something potentially important is about to happen in slow-mo. I think I'd like that myself. So this was the kind of feedback I got. And I know a number of people who program Android, and and some iPhone programmers, and who knows, there's maybe some potential, at least for, I wouldn't want to evolve on the phone because you'd burn out your battery too quickly, but you could visit and you could give instructions and things like that, and you could do the evolution on your PC.
So that's an interesting point. There is a clear delineation from what you're describing in terms of the PC itself still being used for the evolution component versus the servers. In terms of your own thinking of load balancing, that was obviously clearly a very conscious decision. Do you think there's potential in the future, if you launch a mobile app in particular, to do more of the evolution on the servers?
Well, the whole idea of Darwin at Home, of course, was to somewhat mirror the idea of SETI at Home and Folding at Home and that sort of project where, you're trying to get the volume of computation by delegating it to large numbers of people. So that's one of the things behind it. I'm not necessarily ready to spend a lot of money on a whole grid of computers doing evolving, but it certainly could happen. It's just not something that I can finance right now, or that I would want to finance. Part of the charm of this whole Tetragotchi game is that people are lending their computers and they're watching the evolution happen, and only the genes of the successful phenotypes actually are communicated back to the server. Nothing else comes back. So when you play the game, you get a snapshot of the entire reality to your own little client on your PC. But whenever you do an evolution episode, only the successful genes go back to the server. So it's an interesting metaphor, and I'm not sure. It could all be done, of course, on servers. But what's the fun in that?
But I mean, the idea of if you had a mobile app, maybe the creatures would be sufficiently smaller or have a smaller genotype. There might be ways that you could minimize the processor and also almost introduce a different species into slow-mo of the mobile users. Maybe they could be like little gnats or something.
The way it is right now, things are quite minimal. I mean, there's like, for example, when you log into the game, you get a copy of the entire universe to your PC. Everything, every Tetragotchi on the whole planet comes in. I might have to change that soon if the number of people gets too large. And I probably will, actually. But for now, I'm just for simplicity's sake, I'm transporting every single one of them. So they only consist of coordinates and genes and a couple of, some status information. So in effect, these Tetragotchi bodies are as minimal as you can pretty well get. They don't contain anything but what they absolutely need. So there's nothing really holding it back from putting it onto a mobile device. It's just that evolution in this context involves playing out physics, where there's a lot of floating point operations going on in order to determine which one is more successful and which one is less successful on the basis of, how far they've traveled towards the goal that you've given them. So there's just a hell of a lot of just number crunching to get, any result out of the evolution. And I'm just not sure that phones at the moment are the thing you'd want to do that with, because of the fact that they're battery operated. That's really what the core of it is. Anything you can plug in, okay. But if it's battery operated, I wouldn't really want to. There's a lot of, you could say gratuitous calculation that goes on just to do some evolution. For me, I don't know. I wouldn't want to burn out my phone doing it. Although it does make sense to visit your Tetragotchi from your mobile phone. That would be fabulous if I could get it to do that. And that's one thing. And there's a potential, of course, to do some modicum of evolution, on the server. But because the numbers are large, in theory, you could have large numbers of Tetragotchis on one planet. Suppose there were 1,000, then I would have to evolve, go through the evolution episodes for 1,000 different creatures. That's just a lot of number crunching on the server, and I haven't got the servers available for that.
I guess there are two parts to this. The first is potentially utilizing some of the even cell phone based GPU mathematical optimization and potentially farming some of the processing out to a GPU. But the second part is, and this goes in parallel with some of the EvoGrid discussion, Bruce Damer, after Thanksgiving, he and Peter Newman are going to University of California, San Diego, I believe, to install the EvoGrid on one of their server networks. And I think increasing, through the EvoGrid, Bruce, although it's all very heavily EvoGrid branded, but Bruce is certainly making contacts in the, I don't know what you'd call them, the distributed computing community, let's call it that. And I think the potential is that other artificial life developers could potentially utilize some of this as well. Obviously, communication with Bruce and this kind of negotiation would need to ensue, but it sounds like what you're describing is that you are developing very much a distributed model for Tetragotchi currently. It's just a lot of the distribution has the individual players doing a lot of the computation. As you're developing this, and particularly as you talk about the potential for thousands of users to pick it up, are you thinking about the kind of distributed problems that will be occurring in the future, and what are you doing to tackle these issues currently?
Well, it's not. I haven't been thinking in terms of peer-to-peer or something like that. That would introduce a lot of interesting challenges in itself, and I'm not really going to go that direction right now. It's fairly straightforward. It's kind of a hub and spoke model, although the whole thing is open source and extremely lightweight. Like there's not even a database involved. It does everything just with the file system, so it wouldn't be a stretch at all to imagine hundreds of different servers running a slow-mo and somehow being able to, transport yourself perhaps from one place to another as a Tetragotchi, because all of these things can be transported. So there's more. The thing I would consider more sort of within reach would be something where the servers are federated in some way, but not necessarily that it's all completely peer-to-peer. So I haven't really worried too much about the networking, the distributed systems, because the model right now is fairly straightforward hub and spoke. So once the whole thing is a federation of planets rather than just one to boldly go, that's when it gets a little more interesting. I would love to, if anybody's interested in looking into how this could be done, that would be fun.
Very interesting. And the Darth Vader Tetragotchi seems like the next choice. So in terms of the open source nature of this, is all the source code out there for people to pick up, or is some of it still being released slowly?
Oh, no, it's all out there. It's on Google Code. I haven't been putting too much effort into maintaining it because I haven't really got other people, more than just a handful of people looking at the code. So I have been seriously considering, I probably will in a short while, sort of refactor the code to make it a lot more palatable. I mean, as far as just structuring and naming things and stuff like that, it's actually quite nice now. But it could be a bit more sort of oriented to the word Tetragotchi and the whole theme of it. And I was thinking of putting it on GitHub so people could play with it a little more easily, because all of the stuff we're doing for that new company of ours called Delving, we're doing it all on GitHub. So I'm getting used to using Git and quite enjoying it. So I'm probably going to put something on there, in the first part of next year. But yeah, it's definitely available from start to finish. When I fix a bug or when I add a feature, I commit it to the Google Code Subversion repository, so anybody can get a hold of it the next time they do an update. And I've set it all up with it's pure Java, so that makes life easier in some respects as far as not worrying which platform you're on. And I've also set it up with all sorts of build files and things like that, so that there's essentially 4 modules, and they're all Maven. They're set up with Maven, so that you can basically say fire it up and install it and go for it. There's not too much of a threshold, although I haven't been completely documenting it for people so to make it really easy, but that's quite also very much within reach. It's more or less, check out the code and run the build and go.
Very good. Very good. Well, I understand that you listened to the recent Tim Taylor Biota Live with some interest. In terms of his vision of individual web pages being artificial life agents, do you see this as being part of the Tetragotchi paradigm, or do you think that there's some more that you could do potentially to embody some of Tim Taylor's vision?
Well, I was listening to that. I think it was in the rain on the bicycle, and I was very fascinated by the by the whole thing. Because the ideas, it does seem related in some way, or it does seem something that it seemed to be something that's at least in the same ballpark. And the thing that I'm sort of stuck with, the thing that is a challenge for my stuff is the simple fact that there's a lot of number crunching involved to do with doing the evolution. So I can't really have too much of it done in script languages like JavaScript, because I think the efficiency would just not be up to par. But having anything that would make this stuff more easily available to people, like if it were just a web page. If you could just go to a page and boom, your Tetragotchi would appear in some sort of magical hardware accelerated HTML5 canvas or something like that. That it would just the page would appear, your Tetragotchi would appear, and you'd be able to cruise around, and that would be absolutely phenomenal. Like right now, it's not hard. You have to, but you do have to run the Java virtual machine on your computer, and it's not easy, not hard to install all that, but it's still a couple of steps. Whereas if it were just a web page, then with HTML5 or something, when that takes hold, then that would be absolutely a cat's meow. And you can also imagine it being easily integrated into something like Facebook or these other social networks. Then there's a potential for it to really go big.
Fascinating. Yes, I think Tim set the bar very high, but also got people such as yourself thinking very strongly about the paradigm as he described it. Because anything you can do, I mean, if Tim's able to get anything done, I know the way he was talking about it was quite speculative, but when he was the way he was talking about it, I tuned into it right away, because anything you can do on a completely easily as a sort of a zero setup scenario where you can get people just clicking on a page and then they're participating. And that's what it seems like he was talking about. There's a huge potential for setting up some sort of artificial life thing based on that scenario, because you could really have huge numbers all of a sudden. So the substrate for your artificial life could be quite suddenly quite large. So there's a real potential there. It might not be exactly the same kind of thing as Tetragotchi is, but I'm sure there are things that can be invented, and Tim's racking his brains to do it now, and I wish him luck. Sounds great. It does, definitely. Well, Gerald, I'd like to thank you for the chance once again to catch up. It seems like it's been far too long since you last appeared on a Biota Live, and in part it's my fault as well, because I haven't been recording them quite as frequently as I had through previous years, but as I described, the Dick Gordon book projects and freshsim.org and various other things have been taking my time as well. But it's a pleasure as always to have you on Biota Live. What is, aside from Tim Taylor, what's your general sense of the artificial life community and the directions that it could be going in the future?
I don't know. I haven't heard too much, surprising new directions in the last while. I really did enjoy the talk with Tim for sure. I don't know. There's probably a lot, like we discussed before. There's probably a lot of artificial life or artificial life-like things that are happening, but not understood under that name. So I think scaring some of those things out of their hiding places would be interesting. If people could just come up and describe what they're doing. Their artificial life-like projects. I'm sure there's a bunch out there that we haven't seen yet.
I agree. Yes, it's the responsibility, I guess, of the community to keep their eyes open and flag them where they are applicable, and certainly invite them on Biota podcasts or get them contributing to the general dialogue. And similarly, I think we can also form almost virtual welcome baskets to the Artificial Life community, and maybe these book series or Fresh Sim or these other things will work to that end too.
I'm feeling quite guilty of the fact that I haven't been communicating much about what I've been doing. But there's just enough time to get the actual code working, because that takes a lot of work, especially when you're talking about it. When you're setting up a multi-user online game, you wouldn't believe what can go wrong when you're online and you're multiplayer. It's quite remarkable how that ups the ante. And so I haven't been communicating enough of it out. I feel guilty about that, also not being on Biota Live for such a long time. But the things are happening, so there's a lot more to talk about when we get to talk again. So that's a good thing.
Very good, Gerald. Well, thank you once again for the chance to chat with you today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and let's hope it isn't 8 months until our next chat. I'll talk to you soon, Gerald. Take care.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.